This is the Vic Feazell Show podcast, sponsored by Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria, Pinewood Coffee Roasters, and the law offices of Vic Feazell. I'm kind of thinking he might have done this one, and if he did this one, what if he did do Kate Rich?
Right. So you're saying that this could have been the start or the trigger for his potential serial killing.
It could have been the trigger. Yes. It could have been the trigger, because here's somebody who is the only person he ever loved, the only person that ever loved him. There was no sex involved. And then for him to kill her?
Yeah.
You know, it's still hard for me to believe he did, but the evidence points to it.
It does point to it.
Evidence points to it. And then if he did kill Kate Rich in the same manner,
right?
But the evidence doesn't point to that, because if he did, there would be Kate Rich blood in that car.
True,
you know?
True. Yeah, there'd be way more evidence out there. And the thing with Kate Rich too, remember, they had the purse, they had everything before they had Henry.
So
they could have fed him all the facts, and he could have regurgitated.
So here's what I would like to know, and this is what I would like for Phil Ryan to let me know, is were these bones discovered prior to Henry's confession? Prior to June 16th, 1983.
And I would say from the Denton report, no. Henry did lead them to the bones.
Henry led them to the bones, according to the Denton report.
Correct.
Yes.
And then
but
after
had
the
they
bones
already been discovered? Because I read something somewhere once about that suitcase that led me to believe it had already been discovered.
Well, and I would agree. So the suitcase, according to what we were going through with Kate Rich, the Denton police located the suitcase with Becky Powell's belongings on August 24th, 1982, a day after Becky was last seen.
Yeah.
So the suitcase had been found. You're correct. A day after she was last seen. So basically,
Henry right around that area.
Right, around that area.
So how did Henry lead him to the suitcase if it had already been found?
Well, from the Denton report,
according to this report, he jumped the fence and walks by a railroad track or something and shows him the suitcase.
Right. So in his confession, as referenced by the Denton report, he says that he had the suitcase and threw it over some kind of railroad embankment or something. So, you know, he could have gone back to relatively where it was. But even then, I mean, a year later, how much is really going to be there?
I know, but did they find the suitcase 2 days after she was killed?
Yes.
Well, where were the buzzards?
You got to ask.
You know? Where was the smell? I, last year, had this armadillo that was just tearing up my yard. And I saw that thing out by the riverbank one day. I got my .22 out and beat it in on it, and whoa, made it jump a backflip, and it killed it. And so I put on my gloves and just tossed it over the riverbank.
All circle of life action.
Oh
going
my
on
goodness!
At Vic's house.
By the time I got home from work, because I was early in the morning, and forgive me, you know, all the PETA people and all that, but this was a terrorist armadillo. This armadillo needed to be killed. It needed killing. But by the time I got back from work, man, the buzzards were everywhere. And that was just a little armadillo.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 days later, I could walk out by the riverbank, and man, I could smell it.
Yeah.
It was just putrid. And this was a little armadillo. So if they found that suitcase 2 days later, they would have been smelling that dead body. And I've been around dead bodies before, and I'm telling you, and I've been around blood, and it stinks.
Yeah.
I mean, human blood spills somewhere, within a few hours, it stinks.
Yeah.
So, so I've still got my concerns. Right now, I'd vote yes, Henry did it. But there's so much more information I'd like to have.
Yeah. So the whole thing is confession, and then they take him out to the scene. And at this point, he starts kind of roaming around. And what's interesting is in the report, Vic, they actually write, let me find this. It should be noted at this time that during the entire search of the scene, the suspect, Henry Lee Lucas, was not handcuffed and was allowed to wander approximately 50 to 75 yards away from police officers. indicating to this officer that Henry Lee Lucas was voluntarily showing the location and had not been coerced in any manner or forced to show the location, that he was there voluntarily. And that he was there voluntarily. I like that. Kind of let him off the chain. Jeez.
And it says here that Lucas pointed out 7 locations to the officers at the scene. 7 locations where body parts were. Now, that's when he says, yeah, I was walking to the survey stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Lucas also at the time led officers west to the railroad tracks, and after climbing a fence and crossing the tracks, located clothing that he claimed belonged to Frieda Powell on the west side of the tracks between the tracks and the fence. So they're saying he located them that day on...
or at least clothes. At least clothes. So the suitcase itself may have been found a year prior.
Okay.
But some miscellaneous articles could have been found.
The clothing was scattered along a rocky ledge along the west side of the tracks. There were numerous items apparently belonging to a female that consisted of clothing, makeup, fingernail polish, brushes, combs, a purse, a billfold, costume jewelry, a suitcase having an orange color on it, and also a gray or beige overnight bag.
So those could have been hers?
But it doesn't say. I mean, no pictures, no
forensic report on it,
no receipt,
right?
No nothing.
No Medicaid card like in Cambridge.
No Medicaid card. That could have been anybody's. And then they started picking up bones.
Right.
One bag contained part of a bra. One bag contained 2 shoulder blades. One bag contained a pillowcase and a blue washcloth. One bag contained 2 pieces of a pelvic bone, 3 vertebrae, a tailbone, and 1 unidentified bone. The second bag at the site, 2 contained charred wood. The Site 3 had 1 bag containing 6 leg bones and 18 foot bones. First bag contained a human skull.
Ooh.
And the second bag contained a human jawbone.
Well, there you go. There's a that's a human corpse.
And let's talk about the skull.
Right.
They sent that to the Dallas Forensic Lab.
Right.
Where Dr. MFG Gilliland looked at it. I know Dr. Gilliland. Dr. Gilliland was our expert pathologist in the Lake murder cases. She may have also been our expert on the Melody Bolton murder that I prosecuted when Melody was murdered up in West Texas by Clifton Eugene Bellew, who has since been
that one.
executed. Yes. Dave Deaconson and I prosecuted that case. Dave's a great lawyer. He practices here in Waco now. Dr. Gilliland had worked with us a lot, and I respect her a lot. And what Dr. Gilliland did with that skull, let me find it here, is that she and her colleague named Dr. Matthews did what's called a superimposition. And that's where they take a photograph and then they kind of superimpose it over the skull.
Right.
And she says that she thinks this was Becky based on the shape of the skull.
Right.
He says he took a photograph of the young woman and a photograph of the skull and literally double exposed them. And this is Brad Sheladay who's talking to her. He said, so you're saying that he laid Frieda's picture over a picture of the skull and then found what reference points he could, is that correct? Dr. Gilliland says yes. And then she wants to know, what's your interest? Brad asked her, what's your interest in this years later? And Dr. Gilliland says, we were interested in the process and had gotten better at it. The doctor said, I could do it. I said, oh, yeah? And he said, yeah. And so we did it. And we picked this case at random. And then toward the end of the interview, I just love her. She says, Try not to surprise me with a subpoena. That really irritates me.
Yeah, I bet it does.
And Brad says, I will not do that. And Dr. Gilliland says, good, because like I said, I really think he's good for this one.
Yeah.
So, that's another nail in Henry's coffin as far as Becky is concerned, because Dr. Gilliland thinks that that's Becky's skeleton, although there was never any DNA done on it.
Right.
I really wish they'd do that.
Just enough. They did take one bone or some fragment where they were able to get a blood type off it, which they found was A. So they were able to do that.
And that was Becky's blood type, or Frieda Powell's blood type. Yeah.
So to kind of talk about those stakes that you were talking about, how Henry said the stakes were already there. So in the report, and this is the Denton PD report, it says, prior to the gathering of the physical evidence, the suspect, Lucas, was then taken back to the Denton Police Department, where a complete set of fingerprints and ID were made of him. So they'd gone out. He had located these seven areas. So they take him back to the police station. And at that point, prior to the actual gathering of the physical evidence, which consisted of the human skeletal remains, a detective Baker obtained 7 wooden stakes approximately 5 feet in length with numerous red rags and put them in. So they had already been to the scene. Henry pointed out the 7 spots. Henry's taken back to the police station, and then they put the stakes in then.
Okay. Well, Henry claims those stakes were there when he got there. How didn't Henry know about the stakes unless they took him back afterwards?
They may have. Who knows? Because so Gilliland's report, which she works for the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, they have one initial report, and then they have a supplementary report where additional bones are found. So I wouldn't doubt it if maybe they took him back out there and he located more of them, and then that supplemental report was filed in.
A Sergeant Jones from Denton, he discovered that the victim, Frieda Powell, had a brother named Frank.
Yes, Vicky. Yes.
And Frank is in a foster home in Lakeland. Oh, I got to correct something I said when we were talking about the Kate Rich case. I said that Becky had been put in a children's home and didn't like it, and then ran away from the nursing home. She didn't run away from the nursing home. That was just my brain messing up. She ran away from that children's home.
There you go.
Yeah, and I think I called Kate Rich Faye a couple times.
Faye Rich?
Yeah, I do that. I mix up names. So y'all forgive me. Just try to figure out what I'm talking about, and let's go with it. I might get a name confused now and then.
That's funny.
He stated that Frank was in a foster home in Lakeland, Florida, and that the brothers stated that Frieda had gone to a dental clinic in Jacksonville, Florida, over near 7th Street, and might have caps on her teeth. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they ever checked on that. I think they did.
They did. They did. And what they tracked down was, unfortunately, that the dental records that they were able to get from that dentist were basically baby teeth. So unfortunately, the teeth on the skeletal remains were all adult. All the baby teeth were gone. So there's no conclusion with the dental records.
Frank stated that the victim was in fact a runaway, had been placed in a children's home, and was in the process of being placed in a foster home when she ran away from Florida. He stated that the victim had lived with Robert Harley and Sarah Harley most of her life. So that's when she ran away with Henry. And then Otis was involved in this too. Otis can't ever tell the truth. Otis had told him that in May of '83 that he had gotten a phone call from Frieda.
Yeah.
But then later under questioning, he says, "No, I lied about that." So I don't know why he would lie about stuff like that.
Well, didn't he say he did it to protect the parents of her or something? It was some screwball kind of thing. It's like,
her daddy, yeah. Toole later told Buddy Terry that he made that comment up because of pressure from the natural father of Frieda, Powell, and that he had not actually talked to her. I don't understand that. Pressure from the father. He did state that Frieda had in the past broken one of her arms, and I don't remember anything about that.
I don't
in
think
the autopsy.
Yeah, I don't think anything ever came of that.
Said Henry Lee Lucas lived with him until January of '82, at which time Henry Lucas and Frieda Powell left Florida in a brown 1975 LTD. So that's when they left, not with Frank, not with Otis. There wasn't all that traveling around, with that craziness, like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Oh, God.
That's still listed in the top 10 best movies for Halloween?
Is it really?
It really is.
Weird, man.
Yeah.
Your film is based on lies.
Based on lies, but, And an interesting thing about Brad Sheliday, if we're talking about horror movies, Brad was working with on this book about Henry, and he was working with a writer named Gunnar Hansen. And Gunnar Hansen, I met Gunnar, really jovial Norwegian guy, sweet as they come, fun to talk to. Gunnar Hansen was the original Leatherface.
That's funny.
In Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Perfect.
Isn't that great? He was the original. And talk about a small world.
Okay.
Rod Ponton, the lawyer in El Paso for Henry during the Apodaca case.
Yeah.
He had, before he was a lawyer, he worked on the movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, is that right?
He knew Gunnar Hansen too, and he had worked as a grip on that.
Is that
movie.
right?
Yeah, he was just one of the crew.
Small world.
Small world, man. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Henry Lucas, Gunnar Hansen, or Rod Ponton. Yeah, it's a small world.
Come together. Crazy, man. So, Vic, they go out, they dig up the bones, and you listed what they found: the skull, jawbone, some ribs, some pelvis, some legs, some toes, and feet.
Yep.
Bag them up, shoot them off to have them, I guess, put together, assembled, and do an autopsy report.
Mm-hmm.
So how does an autopsy report typically get done like that, Vic? I mean, here's a bunch of bags, here, Doc, put them together and figure it out.
They can lay them out in the approximate position they would be in. It's almost impossible to really tell exactly how tall someone would be because all the connecting tissue is gone, the vertebrae, all that. And so you don't know about the person's length. You can get an approximate height. And as I recall from the autopsy, the height was off just a little. But that's not unusual, see. That's not unusual at all. And they can look at the skeleton and tell from the pelvis, is this a male or a female?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then sometimes they can get an approximate age based on the bones. And then like here, they were able to superimpose the picture of Frieda Powell over the skull. Now, I don't know how scientific that is. I don't know if that would pass muster today, but it's still kind of cool. And that's just one more little thing that makes it look like, yeah, this was Becky.
Right.
So
why don't we flip to the autopsy report then, Vic, and let's see what Dr. Gilliland had to say, shall we?
Let's see. Tell me about that.
So, let's see. Oh, you're right. So here we go, Vic. She says the bones are examined and placed in anatomical order. So you're correct. So they do lay them out. The bones are that of a normally developed, normally nourished white female whose age may be estimated between 15 and 17 years of age. So
yeah,
I guess she was able to determine that, which of course fits Becky.
And I've mentioned this before. They had to go through these autopsies fast. Yeah. It wasn't like on TV where that body will be in the pathology lab for months while they're investigating it. No, man, you get them in, get them out as quick as you can because they're stacking up at the door. They're stacking up like cordwood at the door, man. And so they're having to get them out as quick as they can. So you don't have a lot of assumptions are made.
Okay.
And if the policeman says this guy confessed and he says it was her,
and this is the manner of death.
Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a cognitive bias that anything you see is going to support that conclusion. And that's my concern with this, is the cognitive bias involved. Although I still am going to go that, yeah, he did this one. But I'm still hopeful that, Frieda, if you're out there,
Promo it with Vic.com.
phone home. Yeah, do it.
Phone home.
Phone home.
Oh, jeez.
Becky, phone home. So anyway.
So with them telling Dr. Gilliland, hey, he confessed to stabbing her and then dismembering. So she can look for, obviously, the signs of a dismemberment, which I would imagine nicks on bones with a knife and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty easy to determine, and she was really good at that. I got a story about how busy she is, though, or was when she worked there.
Oh, do tell.
Yes. There's an investigator I know who went up to talk with her about one of our cases. And she was involved in an autopsy at that time with a body, not with the skeleton.
Okay.
And she says, I don't have time to come out, but he can come in here if he wants. So he walked in there. He told me later, he said, Vic, I've seen a lot of things in my life.
Oh, no.
And I've never almost lost my cookies. Never, never, never. But
Okay.
I walk into that room and seeing Dr. Gilliland, she's a really small lady. She's probably not 5'1", and said she was leaning over this examining table with this corpse split right down the middle and open, and she's looking at something with one hand, and she's holding a Whataburger with the other hand and eating it while she does
kidding.
the autopsy. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
That's how busy they were. She had to eat her lunch while she was working.
And then she set the burger down on the body.
Wow.
Here, hold this.
I would hope she didn't do that. I would doubt she did that. But she was a tough lady, and she had seen a lot. Nothing affected her. She was just she was incredible. I remember
I couldn't do it.
during one of the Lake murder cases, the one of the defense lawyers says, Dr. Gilliland, that injury to the victim's vagina, couldn't that be consistent with a injury from a male penis? And Dr. Gilliland looked at him and goes, is there any other kind of penis?
Wow.
She was funny. She had a good sense of humor, and she was a very smart lady. And if she thinks this was Becky, then barring something coming out of left field, I'm gonna go with that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Phil Ryan on this one. And that damn Henry lied to me, man. He and
Yeah.
Phyllis Wilcox lied to me.
And what's crazy is what you said, he would cry that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have done episodes where you can hear him crying, confessing to something that we know he didn't do.
You know,
It's
that's
like he was able to
true.
turn that emotion on and off and really sell it.
Or maybe he was instead of turning it off and on, maybe he was visiting some kind of emotion that he really had. That pain and that anger from his childhood and from the way his mother treated him.
And frankly, if he loved Becky, why wouldn't he cry
And why
when
wouldn't he?
rehashing her passing? So the autopsy report, Vic, the one thing they note is that there was a overbite, which someone had noted previously as well. So that kind of
Becky had an
corroborates.
overbite. Yeah, Frieda had an overbite. Her relatives remembered that, and it's shown in the photo. Yes.
So 3 right ribs have incised wounds and fractures. Additional cuts are present along numerous bones. So,
Oh, Henry,
oh, Henry, what have you done?
what have you done?
So Dr. Gilliland concludes, it is our opinion that the skeletonized remains recovered from 3900 block of Stemmons Freeway in Denton County are those of Frieda Powell on the basis of circumstantial
Circumstantial
identification.
identification.
The remains are consistent in height, weight, and age. Attempted positive identification was not successful with the dental records due to the baby teeth issue. And a facial sketch from the skull resembles a photograph of the missing girl. That's pretty trippy. Like, how does that even work?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I mean, sometimes when they actually find the person, they don't look anything like it. Like Deborah Jackson.
Yeah.
She sort of looks like those sketches of Orange Socks, enough that her sister was able to say, hey, that sort of looks like my sister, but not exactly. But it's close enough. It's close enough that it's a good tool.
I mean, how do you even
And I
possess
trust
the
Dr.
skill set to
Gilliland.
do that?
Hey, is question about that autopsy report. Are there any mustard stains on there?
Any little onion fragments in there? Perhaps a slice of cheese.
We're going to go to Moroso's Wood-Fired Pizzeria after a while, but man, I'm suddenly hungry for a Whataburger.
Oh man, I could go for one too. They're so good. So
Yeah, I like them even though they were bought out. You know, they were a Texas chain, and now they're where? Chicago?
Yeah, Chicago.
Chicago. Just like the chili brand. What was the chili brand we used to have in Texas?
I don't know,
Ostex or something. But it was the commercials were the cowboys sitting around the campfire, and one of them
Pace Salsa.
Oh, is that it?
New
That
York
was
City?
it. Yeah, New York City. Yeah, and then they were bought out by a company in New York City.
That's
that was
so
it.
funny.
Pace. That was it. New York City.
What are those commercials?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So anyway, I still like Pace, and I still like Whataburger.
It's making me hungry too. So here's the final say here. It says the injuries are consistent with dismemberment at or near the time of death, and it is our opinion that Frieda Powell died as a result of homicidal violence and that her body was dismembered shortly after her death.
Yeah, and like I said, I know I've said this 5 or 6 times since this podcast started. Everything I know about Phil Ryan, he's basically a stand-up guy. And so I'm going to choose to go with Phil on this one rather than Henry. And Phil Ryan, if you're listening to this, and eventually someday you will, because this is streaming. You don't have to be here right now to listen to it. You might hear this a year from now. But promo at withvic.com.
It would be so cool to talk to him.
It'd be so cool to talk to you, man. And you know a lot that could fill in these holes. And you know that I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong, because I did with Phyllis Wilcox.
Yeah.
Oh,
Phyllis,
boy.
Becky, Phyllis.
Phyllis, Becky, Phyllis. I had egg on my face, man.
Didn't Geraldo Rivera do an episode on that?
I don't remember if he did it on Becky, because that blew up pretty quick.
Yeah.
It hit the local news. It might hit one little bit of national. But it wasn't 2 or 3 days later, because once word started getting out and people started looking at her and going, that's Phyllis Wilcox, man. I knew her when she was a little girl. I had somebody call me and say, I'm looking at a high school annual that's got her picture in it. It's Phyllis Wilcox. And I'm going, oh, my God.
Man. Well, who was it? It was National Enquirer, right? Weren't they the ones who did the big write-up on it?
I don't remember.
It's one of those.
I don't remember.
One of those.
The only time I remember being in National Enquirer, it was a murder that happened between here and McGregor, Texas, and it involved Jimmy Swaggart's group. Yeah.
Who's Jimmy Swaggart?
He was a televangelist at the time. He's the one who got caught with a prostitute and cried and said, "Oh, I have sinned."
Oh, boy.
And so they bring him back. He builds his ministry back. Keep those tithes and offerings coming in so we can keep this valuable ministry on the air. That's where I get that phrase from. I say when I talk about her story, because the televangelists used to say it all the time. Him and Tilton and Don Stewart from Miracle Valley, Arizona. He was a predecessor. He came after A. Allen, Miracle Valley, Arizona. These radio preachers used to be quite an industry back before people started wising up. Put your hand on the radio.
Oh, really?
Put your other hand on your billfold. Yeah. And you send your tithes and offerings. This love offering to keep this ministry on the air. And so, yeah, Jimmy Swaggart had. There's this lady in just outside of McGregor who was crazy about Swaggart and was sending him her money every month.
Okay.
And his fundraisers reached out to her, figured out she could use a little help around the house. So they hired a young 19-year-old girl to come live with her and take care of her. Problem is, this girl is an alcoholic, and when she drinks, she gets violent. She had been locked up as a juvenile for killing an elderly person one time.
No way.
And Swaggart's people go visit her. They get her to change her will and leave everything to Swaggart.
Wow.
They put this woman in there to take care of her, and a few days later, she breaks into the liquor cabinet and takes the footrest off the wheelchair and bludgeons the lady to death with it.
Wow.
Then picks the lady up by her heels and swings her round and round and round the living room. I walked into that crime scene and I see blood spatter on the wall like I've never seen before. I mean, up and down, all around on everything.
That's insanity.
Yeah. So she killed that lady, and this lady's son ended up getting a lawyer and suing Swaggart, and I think they ended up splitting the estate in half. But Swaggart still, and my office looked at it. We tried to find some evidence that his organization knew that she was a killer before they put her there, but we couldn't quite get there.
I mean, was she worth a lot of money to where it'd be worth offing her for it?
A few $100,000. You know, back in the 80s, that was a lot of money.
Keep those ties and offers coming.
Yeah. And then Jimmy got caught with a prostitute the second time. And that, I have sinned again did not work quite as well as I have sinned. So.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so. He was quite a musician.
Oh, yeah.
His music was good. He was a good singer. He was cousins to Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, they both came out of the South at the same time.
That's
fabulous piano players, and Jerry Lee Lewis went rock and roll, and Jimmy Swaggart went gospel.
Huh?
Yeah. Matter of fact, in the movie about Jerry Lee Lewis, there's a short little cameo of an actor playing Jimmy Swaggart, who's giving Jerry Lee Lewis hell for playing the devil's music. I guess we've all sinned.
Oh, man.
God bless us. Let's do the best we can. All right, I love all you guys. Keep listening. Listen to Stan Mason. He's got a great radio show. Listen to Lynn Woolley. I don't agree with anything he says, but I love him. I love him. Listen to him. We need balance. Need balance, and he helps balance the boat. And my friend Gary Richardson has a podcast called Legal Warrior. Gary, if you're listening, put out another one, man. You hadn't put one out since October 6th. I love your podcast, and I want to hear another one.
And if you're in law enforcement, feel free to reach out to us, because what just happened a couple days ago, Vic?
Yeah, a couple days ago, a law enforcement officer from San Antonio reached out to us. He's been assigned to work the cold cases down there, and he had 3 that Henry's name had come up on. And so we were able to share the Lucas report during the relevant time with him so that he could see the documents that would place Henry in other parts of the country at the time of his murders. And so I enjoyed talking with him. And so email us. He had those cases, and he Googled Henry Lucas, and my name came up that I had represented him before. So he reached out to me to see what I knew about it. And we had a really good conversation, and I don't think he's going to pin those murders on Henry. Matter of fact, I think that's 3 more that are going to be listed as wide open. Yeah. And I hope everybody, all law enforcement agencies, open all the Lucas cases except Kate and Becky. Yeah. Although I would like to have a little more information on those just so we could fill out the file.
Yeah, and Phil, I think, like you said, Phil Ryan can do that for us.
Oh, man, he could fill in all the holes. So if you know Phil Ryan, have him reach out to us.
Yeah. And again,
and this would be a friendly interview. I've always respected him. Yeah.
And any law enforcement who do have cases that have Henry on it, feel free to reach out to us. promo@withvic.com. We'd be more than happy to share our document archive with you.
And I'm so glad we're doing this podcast, too, to preserve this history, because there's so much that's just going to be lost if we weren't doing this. For example, the policeman, the law enforcement man I was speaking to out of San Antonio, and I said, "And you remember Jim Maddox? You know who Maddox was?" And he goes, "No." And I'm thinking, "Oh God, I'm old. I am old.
I am old.
Most of my friends are dead now." So yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. Okay, it's time for us to go to Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria. Thank you for listening to the Vic Feazell Show podcast. We're a primary source podcast. We don't just read about it and then talk about it. We talk about people we've known, things we've done. We're a primary source podcast. Leave a review. Sign up for our email list. And go visit our store, We have a page on www.vicfeazell.com.
You better not rush, you better just chill, or you'll find trouble waiting over that hill. Trooper Bob's patrolling tonight. The law offices of Vic Feazell wish you a happy and laid-back holiday season. And if you've been injured by someone who wasn't driving laid back, call Vic Feazell at 1-877-WITH-VIC. Drive laid back and lower your speed. Trooper Bob's patrolling tonight.
Principal offices in Waco and Austin, Texas.